Welcome to Prestige Class. My name is Tony Vicinda here on the Plus One EXP channel. We just want to help designers find people who love their games and help people find amazing games from designers that they can love. We're a weird little brand that multi-classes in tabletop game design, beard and skincare alchemy, and the Bardic College of Content Creation. But you probably didn't come here to hear about me. Maybe you did, and if so, thank you very much. But hopefully you came here to hear from Tyler Crumrine, who we're going to be talking to today about design, about creating an SRD, about launching a game company, and about this new RPG subscription project that he is working on. Tyler, can you tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tyler Crumrine. My pronouns are he, him, his. And yeah, if people have heard of my work, it's probably from a game of mine that released last year during Zine Quest called Beak, Feather, and Bone. It's a map labeling game that I kickstarted. And then really, over the last year as the pandemic shut the country and really the world down, and my main source of income, which was theater work, kind of disappeared. I suddenly found myself working as a full-time game designer. And I'm very lucky that Beak, Feather, and Bone took off in that way. And now going into 2021, I'm trying to lean into that process, because theaters aren't reopening anytime soon. At least hopefully they aren't, if people are being safe. But I have a lot of momentum with BFB. I've really enjoyed continuing to support that game. And I also want to put out more games now in a way that won't screw me over when taxes come. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to be a formal LLC.
Let me know when you figure all that out. That's one of the biggest parts about it. We do have a couple of people watching with us, very excited. MV, if you or Starfish Killer, if you are, you guys are absolutely classmates. I think that's great. Thanks for being here. If y'all have questions and you're watching right now, as we go through, please toss them out. We'd love to ask your questions. That's one of my favorite parts about doing this live instead of just recording it and then popping it up later. But no, I love that. And we were talking about before we went live about some of the shifts in what I did that changed that are letting us do things here at Plus One EXP and how that kind of parallels some of the journey that you've gone on with Possible Worlds. I'm super excited. I love the professionalism, the approach that you've been taking to doing it. I think a lot of times people are like, we're going to start designing games and then eventually maybe open a studio. And then every year at tax time, people are like, oh man, what did I do? What do I do? How do I do this? And so to see somebody kind of starting from, I designed a game, I've done some supplements for it, I've expanded it out a little bit, and now I have the space and time and want to push into that, very intentionally, I think is a really phenomenal thing. Let's talk a little bit about Beak, Feather, and Bone. So for people who aren't familiar with the game, this was your Zine Quest 2 offering. It's a game that we backed last year because it looked absolutely amazing. I'm a huge Quiet Year fan, and that was one of the touchstones for this game. But tell people a little bit about what the game is, and then a little bit about what went into designing that game for you.
Yeah, so Beak, Feather, and Bone is really a lot of my GM practice crystallized in game form. I, like a lot of people, I got into the hobby via Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, I had moved to New York to work off Broadway, and I did not have an apartment. So one of my best friends put me up on his couch for 2 months. And afterwards, I felt so bad that I was like, I'm going to teach myself how to play this game that Kevin has always wanted to play, and I'm going to run it for him and his wife and her best friend. So really most of my gaming was as a game master, and I was doing all kinds of prep for all of those games. And I never really enjoyed the prep that much. My favorite thing was always just like, okay, I want to have just enough so that once I get to the table, my friends who are, writers and improvisers and actors will be able to surprise me with their creativity and then just kind of build from there. So I started writing Beak, Feather, and Bone almost as a kind of more of a reference text, more of the kind of setting supplements where it's like, all right, turn to page X and you have like these 50 NPCs to choose from, turn to page Y and you have all these buildings and guilds. And I realized that writing that was just awful. I hated it because I was writing this book that's like, oh, it'll make it easier for me to GM later on, but it was still just really hard to write it all up front. I was doing years of work, for games that I would be playing down the line.
Yeah.
And so as I had, become more familiar with the indie RPG scene, as I watched friends at the table play The Quiet Year, I was blown away by that. Started to play it myself, played other map making games. The idea of Beak, Feather, and Bone as a map labeling game came to me as, all right, I have all of these assets that I had commissioned for this setting Bible that I had written that I no longer had any interest in completing. How can I take these assets and still make use of them, present them in a way that players will be able to make use of them, but wrapped up in a game package that reflects the kind of games that I actually enjoy playing and the kind of interactions I actually like to have with players. So what resulted was a simple game where you have a deck of cards. The deck of cards dictates each turn what kind of structure one of the players is going to label on a preset map. Players are also assigned to factions, so really like interest groups that they're acting on the behalf of, whether it's the wizards, the miners, etc. And it just turn by turn, you and your players flesh out this map. And it's a plenty fun game in itself. A lot of times people are completely content to just play it and have their little, world that they've made and not touch it again. But I've really enjoyed how some people have taken that and then like, oh, we have this city, we're going to run our campaign in it. And because their players, did some of that GM prep with you, they're that much more invested in actually interacting with like the NPCs that they came up with, or the idea that someone else had, and they were like, oh, I'd love to hear more of that. Let's pursue that direction.
Yeah. No, I love that. And, Will commented in the chat, amazing how design practices often evolve out of, damn, this sucks, what if it didn't?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, that's why I started a company, because I was very lucky that I, was acquiring this passive income from Beak, Feather, and Bone. And then my active income is more the editing work that I do for other people's RPGs. I'm working with Adam Voss on Babes in the Wood right now. I've worked on a lot of different Zine Quest projects, including Kitchen Nightmares, which is still funding right now. I'm the editor on, and Reliquary, which I believe is just about to finish up. But the parts that I really hated were, the process of like being afraid of my own success, because this game was selling like gangbusters and I was terrified because I was like, my income is going to look vastly inflated for 2020 between all the money that came in through the Kickstarter and all the sales that I did. And so part of me was even afraid to like market too aggressively because I was like, if this really gets away from me, will I be able to keep up, or will things start to slip? So going into 2021, this process really started in November. I had some friends who are now colleagues here in Pittsburgh, Emily and Jackie at Workhorse Collaborative. They're a small marketing consulting firm here in Pittsburgh. They were the marketing director and managing director, respectively, for a great theater here in Pittsburgh that I had worked for that shut down because of COVID, and they were suddenly out of work. So they started this firm to help other small Pittsburgh creatives be able to kind of take the side hustles they were making or take their, self-employed careers and really flourish, as opposed to just kind of fighting for scraps under the table. And also make sure that they were building sustainable models that the next time a pandemic hits, it doesn't all fall apart again. So starting in November, I was just very honest with them about, here's the things that I know how to do. Here are the things that I do well. Here are the things that I don't know how to do. And more than anything, I would love to know the sins of omission. What are the things that I should be doing that will bite me, months down the line when it's too late to realize that I should have even been doing them. Yeah. So starting Possible Worlds was, a fantastic process, because it was one part the kind of creative work that I love of, like creating a brand, creating a color palette, designing a logo, all of that. But it was also just like doing the hard work of thinking like, all right, if I want to make a go at this, what does my budget look like? What do I need to do to be square with the powers that be that want to cut, with the state and national authorities? And how do I make sure that if I want to make a career of this, I'm going to need to do something bigger than a zine, just because I'm going to need to ask people for more money than, what a zine can bear. And what would a company look like under a structure that is true to my design ethos, that is true to what people want and expect from me and what I want to create myself, but also has a long enough tail that it could support me through a year, and also position me to not have to rely on, a Kickstarter promotion that may or may not happen every February.
Yeah. No, I love it. And just watching Possible Worlds take shape over the course of the last, caught my attention maybe a month and a half ago as you started posting about it, in the Brain Trust and a couple other groups that we're a part of online. Just watching that evolve has been an absolutely amazing process. I love the different pieces that you pulled together. I've loved seeing some of the shifts in that. And it's also great to kind of hear your story. You talked about your design ethos. Tell me a little bit more, if you had to kind of put into words, what that is. Tell me a little bit about kind of what are some of the ideas that you love to design around or out of. I know we probably already touched on a few of those, but what's the ethos that kind of informs Possible Worlds?
Yeah. So part of the branding process was really kind of figuring this out for myself. And folks will see this when the Kickstarter page goes live, because I share the same kind of statement anecdote there. But really, the thing that informs my design ethos the most is my younger brother, who is a cattle farmer here in Pennsylvania. He is very offline. He does not own any RPGs or weird dice. But I played Beak, Feather, and Bone with him, and he loved it. It was early in the pandemic. The zine had funded, and my family was wondering, like, what is all this? So I ran it for them over Google Hangouts. And he was fantastic. Because I've always known that he's very creative. He's a natural storyteller. He just has never been really interested in diving into that hobby, because he has so many other hobbies. Like he's out hunting and like fixing his truck. So I think one of the biggest successes of Beak, Feather, and Bone is that it was so approachable that he was able to pick it up, know what to do with it, and just kind of be surprised by his own creativity. And so as I design more games, I think maybe someday down the line, it would be fun to, to have, like, if I had the Lord of the Rings property, be like, sure, yeah, I'll write this big old tome, because the medium is the message.
Right.
Folks who are fans of the big world building book are going to want a big RPG to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as what I think I'm talented at, what I'm drawn to, I am drawn to more games that create those kind of bite-sized, accessible experiences that are intended for one-shot play, are intended for newcomers, but have enough kind of novel things going on that people who are familiar with RPGs might see something they haven't seen before, and enough mechanical ideas that can be transplanted into other games that folks will see like, oh, hey, this could be a mini game within this larger campaign, or this could be a session 0 for something, and hopefully have a life beyond just the tiny thing. So welcoming, but also utilitarian games is kind of my bag.
Yeah. I love that idea. How much do you think your theater background influences some of that? Like, you have the audience in mind of your brother, who's this great storyteller. You want to create something that they could approach. How do you think your theater experiences have influenced the way that you do design?
A ton. So I was working as a theater professional pretty much 2012 through 2020, really right up until the lockdown. And I do a decent amount of teaching. I would go and I would teach at the new school every once in a while. I was a resident artist at my alma mater, taught some theater there and directed the musical. And when I teach, I largely will, and based on the characters that you create through that improv, based on the stories that you explore through that improv, you then kind of each go to your corners and maybe you'll write out scenes and you come back and you're like, hey, let's try and work off this script. And when we get to the end of the script, let's keep going. Or sometimes people would just like devise the entire script and be like, okay, cool. This is the last run of it. We're going to film it. And then we'll write it all down, what we have. And it scratches the exact same part of the brain, you know, those theater games. Probably the cheesiest line that I used I did not use it in my press release, although frankly, I would have been fine with it. But I did use it in like my big email blast to friends and family, explaining like, what are you doing? What is this new company? Especially because I want my theater coworkers to know that like, I'm not just abandoning them, you know, that I still care about this art form. I'm just kind of pivoting for my own, you know, personal livelihood and security. But the thing I've been saying is that like, I'm still interested in collaborative storytelling. I'm still interested in creating spaces where people feel empowered to share their stories and to, you know, to laugh and to feel together. I'm just more focused on play than plays right now.
Oh, so good.
And it's not that hard to take a lot of my theater education and apply it to games. Especially because my theater specialty is impossible theater. So specifically plays that cannot be performed, you know, plays that are so, you know, impractical or illogical or magical thinking that they read well on the page like a book of poetry. And there's a theater of the mind when you read them. But they're never going to get an acting edition because they're just way too impractical. And so working as a theater editor for that kind of work, for that kind of experimental theater, you know, I am able to engage in the theater of the mind of like reading RPGs and extrapolating, you know, the apples spinning in the air of how this works. But also it's fun to have that extra tool set of being like, okay, I can create the same kind of scenarios that we would play with in theater, but I can have even more magical thinking because the people who are consuming it are also explicitly on board for that theater of the mind. Epediah Ravencall, I'm probably murdering his last name, but folks know him as the creator of Dread. So Epediah, it was in a podcast or an essay that he wrote. He defined role-playing games as algorithms for emergent storytelling. So you have a number of variables in it. And so the variables are the creative input that you invite the player to put in. And as those variables are applied to the rules, which are the fixed parts of the equation, if it's a good equation, if it's a good algorithm, then on the other side of the equal sign, you're going to have like an interesting story. And what's more, a story that could only have happened because of those variables. With theater, it's also an algorithm. You just have the answer on one side already solved. You know what the script says. You know what the conclusion of this play is. The variables are more like, what are the spin that you're going to put on the words? You know what you have to say, but you have agency over the backdrop. You have agency over the tone this line is delivered in. You have agency over the costumes. So that kind of the interplay between those, even though I'm making very simple RPGs, by design, it's really been very fruitful for me as a creative to be able to kind of mesh the analytical and the creative sides of my brain in this form of literature that kind of lets me curate experiences for people, even if I can't do it in front of an audience, or even if I can't do it in a living room. I can write something that if somebody reads it, at the dining room table with their partner, it's accomplishing the same purpose as, a play that's only going to get produced if you get X dollars behind it to mount a production.
I love that. And I'd written it down here already, but Starkiller Fish already got to it in the chat. The move from impossible theater to possible worlds is incredibly striking. So
puns keep dawning on me. I think it was Dan Phipps, the designer of High Magic Low Lives, not Low Magic High Lives. Although somebody get out
that's
there,
the hack.
Do that hack. He messaged me the other day being like, so have you said to anyone it's the best of all possible worlds yet? And I was like, no, but I'm gonna have to. So you're the playtest for that phrase.
There we go.
People
I love
can
that.
Let me know in the comments whether they think it's too much or not.
No, I think that's great. I mean, I'm someone who's given to like I think the fun of making a self-aware hyperbolic statement, especially when you're talking about your own offerings, that's what you want to bring forth, the best of all possible worlds, I think is a fun kind of like externalized goal, right? Like this is the place where we're headed. This is the place where we're going. This is what we're running at all the time. I think is something that becomes more of a call to what you want to do than it is a statement about, oh, like our games are just the best. It's a calling card, like it's this consistent reminder of your own desires. I think that's great.
That has been a difficult hurdle though to get over launching this company, because so much of like sending out press releases, so much of self-promotion is, that projecting that kind of confidence, and doing it in a way that is, confident, but is not overbearing, is not egotistical. Yeah. And when I launched Beak, Feather, and Bone on Kickstarter, I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't tell my family or friends. I barely even told like the Discords I was in that I was working on it. It just kind of went up one day. And then it took off. And part of that was intentional on my part, where I was like, well, it's one thing if this game funds because, my friends and family want to like throw me a bone. Mm-hmm. It's another thing if this game funds because the game's community wants it. And so that was what I told myself. But the bigger truth was probably just that I was insecure. Like I didn't feel like a real game designer. I was afraid that if it flopped, I didn't want to
go, well, also I can always say like, I didn't tell everybody about it. And so it wasn't worth it. Or, maybe if I had, like, it gives us kind of permission to have these mental variables without taking on the stress of all the potential that comes with success. Because when you're on the other side of that, when you tell everybody and you hype it up really big, even when it goes out, like Beards right now, like our game is just shipping out to everybody from Zine Quest 2 like a couple of weeks ago. And even still, I'm just like, well, yeah, what if it, like I've played it with plenty of people, like people who don't know me. And I'm like, what if it's actually just horrible and no one likes it? Like what if I've been successful, but it's just a bad game and just no one's telling me? Like, I think no matter what side you end up on, you have these questions, and I think they're all about what kind of permission we're giving ourselves in any of that. But you've thrown your line out kind of deep here, and you also just launched your SRD for Beak, Feather, and Bone. So you put it out to the world for me to play with it. We talked a little bit about SRDs on the stream before. Hey there, Eris, good to see you. SRDs are system reference documents, which comes from kind of the world of coding. But you just put one out. And in game design, it's a way for people to basically invite other people to start hacking their game in a more intentional way. And so tell us a little bit about how you went through the process of creating that SRD.
Yeah, so Beak, Feather, and Bone, I had always hoped from day one that people would play with it. I'm pretty explicit in the text itself about saying, like, you are not married to this map. You are not married to these characters or factions that I include. Feel free to do your own thing. And about like 6 months out from the game, I commissioned a creator who had read Beak, Feather, and Bone and had gotten really excited about, wanting to do more game design because of it. This was an illustrator from the UK that I was like, hey, I love your art. I would love to commission 10 new factions from you, and I'll put out a supplement. And that became Tail, Scale, and Bone. You can find it on my itch, possibleworldsgames.itch.io. And that is a game where we take the same map, but we just kind of say like, well, what if it was underwater? There's no reason that this couldn't be a coral reef. There's no reason this couldn't be merfolk. And then sold those for $1, and we've been donating all of the proceeds to the Bucket Bail Fund. Here in Pittsburgh, they're working towards prison abolition in Allegheny County. Allegheny County prisons are really just awful. They have record numbers of depression, overcrowding, and a lot of people held there haven't even been charged. They're just too poor to afford bail. But through creating that process, and Lizzie, the creator for that, you can find their work going through the itch page as well as more stats about Bucket and things like that. But through creating that, I had so much fun that I really wanted to explicitly encourage more people not only to do that, but to sell their work, you know, both in terms of like, hey, this could, you know, help, you know, be an extra stream of income for other people, but also in terms of like, I know a lot of these homebrew hacks are happening, you know, because I hear about them on Twitter. People send me pictures of the homebrews that they've done on Instagram, or like on their actual play podcasts. And the thing is, other people aren't going to be able to play with that unless you have permission to distribute it. Unless it is hosted somewhere that people who maybe would like, yeah, I'd love to play a Dwarven Mines variation on Beak, Feather, and Bone. You know, it's one thing to have that idea. It's another thing to have that idea, do a quick search, and, you know, for $5, someone has like created the connecting tissue for you.
Yeah.
So at first my thought was to, you know, just kind of say to people like, hey, use Tail, Scale, and Bone as a structure. Don't take any of my rules. But you can like create these supplements that just kind of say like, hey, you need the core version of the game to play this. Because in part, like, the pandemic had me spooked. I was afraid that if Beak, Feather, and Bone sales dried up, then like, now what do I have? But through talking to a lot of people that I really admire about SRDs, including Matt Sanders and Chris with the Wretched SRD, the big thing I realized was that, you know, people are going to be making these hacks regardless. People are going to be, you know, printing out and sharing with people. They're going to be emailing PDFs to their players. And I'm fine with that. You know, like if someone is desperate enough for one of my games that they go to pirate it, you know, that's okay. That's good press for me.
Right. And because you released the game itself it was just rights reserved. It was no open license, anything else. So
when I put out the SRD, I decided like, if I'm going to do this, I don't want to do it halfway. And so I wrote out a description of how the rules work for the game, my design process behind the rules, little like encouragements of like, you know, here are things that I didn't do that you could do. Like I call out the fact that jokers don't have any rule in the game and say, like, in my game, you just take it out, but this is something that you can hack. This is something you can change. And then towards the back of the book, I also include notes on all the fonts that I used, all the different design tricks that I used as far as layout and typesetting, and, you know, the kinds of work that I hope to see come from letting folks play with Beak, Feather, and Bone. And I think it was the right decision because sales haven't slowed down. If anything, Beak, Feather, and Bone is doing better because folks download this free SRD and want to throw me a tip. But in conjunction with the SRD, I started the Beak, Feather, and Bone Jam. And the 2 submissions that we have already are doing things with the game that I never would have thought of.
One of them like 5 minutes after you launched.
Yeah. And that's the great thing, because I knew that people were doing this with the game already. I just wanted to create the permission structure for them to like share their work with people. So I've been super happy with that. And there's what, 20 days left in the jam.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to.
You could have just made the work underneath Creative Commons as a whole and just tossed it out a decision.
Yeah, so it would have been easy for me to take Beak, Feather, and Bone and just change the rights on that and say that, like, hey, this is Creative Commons now, do whatever. But part of why I wanted to write the SRD was because I really want, I want people to have all the tools they need to hack the game, not just look at it and try and reverse engineer what happened here. So the SRD really, like, the rules text of it is just, there are things that I go into on there that I don't go into on the core game that are purely just like, here's the logic of this mechanic. Here's why I did this the way I did it. Here's how doing this other thing would have broken this thing, and so I left it this way.
Did you learn anything about your rules as you were doing the SRD? Did you realize, like, did writing the SRD help you unearth things that may have been unvoiced or non-specific?
Yeah, because I came up with this whole 4-tier breakdown for the phases of play that were nowhere in my brain when I designed the game. They're not in the original text. It was just like, as I tried to write this SRD, I realized that I needed a structure to kind of hang my thinking on, and to make it easier for people to kind of, like, step by step create this game. And it wasn't enough just for me to say, like, on turn 1, you do this. On turn 2, you do this. On turn 3, you do this. I wanted to make sure that I was like, okay, during the, drafting phase, here are the things that are drafted in this game. During the dealing phase, here are the cards that are dealt. During the detailing phase, here are the things that are detailed. During the determining phase, here are the things that you determine in the end. And I wanted to show every single part so that people could know what they could switch out. I really enjoy building plastic scale models like Gunpla and things like that, Gundams. I made
Magikarp, whatever.
I'm very interested in the forthcoming Magikarp. I may or may not have it in a wish list right now. But one of the fun things about building models, and this can be applied to like Warhammer figurines and things like that too, is it's always fun to kit bash. Like, once you get confident enough with the system, once you know kind of like what you want, and when you have your own ideas and headcanon and creative outflow, is that you're like, okay, these are the tools that I've been using. How can I repurpose them to do this other idea that I have that maybe is a bit closer to what I really want? So the same way that I like being able to look at, a model robot, and having built enough model robots, now I know that, like, oh, the joints for these arms are the same here. I could swap these if I really wanted to.
Right.
Part of what I'm doing with the SRD is exposing the joints and letting folks know that, like, hey, this isn't so different from other games. So if you want to kit bash this into your campaign, or, even take this and use it as like a mini game in your larger, like, campaign focused RPG, here are the ways that you could do it. And here's what you could cut without everything falling apart.
Yeah. Well, and even the concept of, if your players are arriving in a city, stopping and playing, Beak, Feather, and Bone, and then establishing what's the history of the city, who are the factions that play, and then, okay, now you're entering into the city, and as players, you have this knowledge. As characters, you're going to now encounter it from a person perspective, and in a lot of the ways you could incorporate this into other campaigns, into base world building, and picking it up. I think there's a ton of just tremendous things. It's also just an absolutely gorgeous game. So I'd really encourage people, if you haven't checked it out, to check it out, as well as the hacks and the SRD. It's a really phenomenal compilation of a designer's freshman game and what can become when you have some intentionality put into that. Let's talk a little bit about your upcoming project. You've got a RPG subscription box. It's going to be it's not just, it sounds like the first offering, but also potentially a core offering for possible worlds going forward. Tell us a little bit about this project that you have coming up.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't want my livelihood to depend on Kickstarter's whims forever. I think it's a very useful tool. It legitimately was life-changing for me in that it kind of created this path forward to even consider the work that I'm doing now. But, I also don't want to be like aiming for the green zone every year and potentially have a failure really just rock my world. So part of the reason why I decided to create this Possible Worlds subscription box comes from my theater background, and looking at the ways that theaters determine their budgets for the year. And a lot of other artistic organizations will do this as well. Really, what they do is they have a subscriber season where they put a whole bunch of effort into marketing, into events, into promotion for their upcoming season of offerings, whether that is like a season at the opera, or even just like a series of readings from like a literary group. And what they do is they figure out what is our baseline budget for the year. They're like, we're going to give ourselves the next couple months to gather all of this money up front. And even though we're going to do little additional things that aren't included in the subscription throughout the year, whether it's like a weekend exclusive or, other programs or things like that, this is our baseline. We know that this money is here, and we can be as lavish or as, play it as close to the chest as we need to based on this budget. So like I said, I didn't want to write larger RPGs, but I did want to make more money. So how do I do that in a way that all right, I want to be able to ask people for $25 to $50 as opposed to $5 to $10. And rather than writing the larger book, I'm going to write more games. So this subscription box is 6 micro RPGs, each of them hovering around 25, 30 pages, about the same size as Beak, Feather, and Bone. And when people back the Kickstarter, what they're going to be backing is a subscription. They can get a digital subscription where at the top of each month, they will get one of these digital games. It'll be delivered via itch. And they can, play it as a one-shot, work it into other things. $25 gets you 6 months of that. So essentially, if I were charging $5 a game, you're getting one free. $50 you also get that digital subscription. So you're getting these games as soon as they release. But after all of those games are completed, I'm going to print them up in a really nice box set. They're actually going to be formatted like steno pads with top wire binding on them. Really nice, collected in a box designed by Austin Breed. He is the same guy who did the art for Beak, Feather, and Bone. He's been doing the visual direction on the box with me. And that will be mailed out for the people who also want the physical artifact of the games. But a lot of that thinking is, okay, how can I figure out my baseline budget for the year? How many people are willing from day one to say yes, I'll take this risk on you. That will give me my baseline budget. But then as each of these games comes out digitally, for the next 6 months, every time a new game comes out, it's going to push people to the old games. It's also going to push people to the backer kit, where they can pre-order the box set if they decide they like one game enough that they would like the physical set of all of them. And then after the year is over, suddenly I have a web store of, 7 games that have physical editions that you can buy one by one, instead of just my one physical game right now, Beak, Feather, and Bone. So it really is a combination of knowing what the kind of games that I think that I'm good at, and knowing what the games that someone would expect from Tyler Crumrine for a follow-up Kickstarter, but in a way that has this longer tail than just, well, we have our flashpoint of funding And then when it comes out, maybe we get more people who buy it aftermarket. I want to, make it so that writing and releasing games is a regular practice for me, and something that brings in consistent income. And then also, as someone who's worked in theater, has worked in publishing, I also want to arrive at a place eventually where I'm able to champion other people's work. I don't want all of the games published by Possible Worlds to be Tyler Crumrine joints. And if I am able to establish this brand, this model enough that, say, in 2021 or it is 2021, gosh, in 2022, 2023, I don't need that Kickstarter. I can just have my website where we can sell the subscriptions for a limited amount of time. If it's a known quantity and people are coming to the box because they trust the box and they trust me as a curator and a publisher, that's when I start to commission games from other creators. These small games that usually don't get a print run, I'll be able to say to someone like, hey, 3 of the games in this box are going to be mine, but I'd love for this game of yours to be one of the other 3. That's awesome. And I will produce it. I will commission the art for it. I will get it into people's hands. And yeah, because ultimately I think that I have benefited so much from the generosity and the support and the belief of others, both in terms of the Kickstarter and in terms of this conversation, that, if I am making a games company, I don't want it to be, Tyler Crumrine Games. I could have bought that domain. I wanted Possible Worlds because I'm interested in creating possibilities for other people.
Yeah, I love that. No, I think that's absolutely where the way that people should be approaching things. We've been talking to Tyler here about his new endeavor, Possible Worlds, along with, design, SRDs, and other things. If you're out there watching right now and you have questions, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to be able to ask them from you. So if you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching in Twitch, go ahead and drop them in. Or if you're watching later, go ahead and drop them in and I'll forward them along to Tyler or let him know that they came in also too. But if you have questions about anything we've talked about or anything you'd love to hear from Tyler, go ahead and drop those in. I think there's so many amazing things about that. Tell us a little bit about some of the games that we're going to be able to expect from this first kind of anthology.
Yeah, so I haven't been talking about the games much. I did share the artists on Twitter. If folks go to Possible W Games, or on Facebook, we're there too, Instagram. I cannibalized all my personal accounts. In part, what we were talking about is if you're very public about it, then you can't back down.
Right.
I've just been telling people yeah, this Kickstarter funds, I'm adopting a cat. Because I want people to hold me to it. Because right. It's something I've been putting off. No, if I have a sustainable income, then there's no reason I can't have, furry joy in my life. Right. But if folks look at those, and then also if people go to possibleworldsgames.com, they'll find some of the inspiration listed there, the kind of games that people are going to expect. One of them is my take on Stardew Valley, Harvest Moon type games, Animal Crossing. It's very much a slow life simulator with epistolary elements, but also opportunities to have town festivals with other players. I've got a game that is inspired by my theater experience and movies like Ocean's 11. I've got a game that is inspired by things like Aladdin and Dragon Ball, stories where there's a wish granting being. I've got a game that is based on dating sims, and also dating television. I am a huge fan of The Bachelor. I watch it every week. It's trash, but it's my trash. And then, yeah, I've got a mech game in there. I've got this one that I'm forgetting. But they're all very good.
We'll just be that one's a secret. You're gonna have to subscribe to find out.
But all of these are games that part of the pitch, if you go to the Kickstarter landing page, is 6 games in 6 genres over 6 months. I really want these games to each, occupy a different headspace create different kinds of stories while also being true to that design ethos of like simplicity and utilitarianism. And a lot of these are also like really extensions of my work as a designer over the last 6 years. You know, some of these are games that like a draft of one of these games I submitted to a friend's tiny zine and was like available exclusively at like a DC zine fair. And now I'm going back to it and finding the things that I really liked about that and bringing my new design knowledge to it. Another game is the game that preceded Beak, Feather, and Bone. Beak, Feather, and Bone was in a lot of ways a hack of the first game of the bundle, which is my Stardew Valley game, where I was trying to design, you know, how do you create a community? And a lot of elements from that game, you know, were kind of chopped and screwed into BFB. So I think people are going to see, you know, bits and pieces of my other design in a way that, you know, hopefully is a fun Easter egg for some folks who have actually, you know, been following my career, but also in a way where like I'm taking these ideas that maybe aren't large enough to, again, sustain that 200-page long world book. But, you know, if the expectation I'm setting for people are like, these are little cool games, then I can just polish that stone to a shine and make sure that when people get it, they're impressed by it and, you know, hopefully inspired to do similar things with their own short work.
In our last couple of minutes, I'd love if you would maybe dive into one of the games for us. Will from the Brain Trust does want to know a little bit more about the dating game, if you're willing to talk about it.
All right. So yeah, Sclusy here. So folks, you know, direct people to +1 EXP. Watch the video, get the Sclusy. You know, it's only in the archives. So the name of the game is dating.sim. It is very much inspired by the computer dating games, you know, things like where you're often the off-screen protagonist and there's like, you know, a variety of different relationships that you can pursue. And it's a lot of multiple choice questions where it's kind of choose your own adventure, where if you play it right, you know, you get the boyfriend or girlfriend or them friend of your choice. So I really enjoy these games. I also really enjoy the weird ones. Like I got a real kick out of Hatoful Boyfriend, which is the pigeon dating simulator that you can get on Steam. And so I had rattling around in my brain, like, how can I approximate this in game form? And what I came up with is a 2-phase RPG, where the first phase, you essentially play the dating game, which was a TV show that no longer exists, but you would have a suitor on, or really like you would have multiple suitors on, and you would have one person who was like the prize. And that person would say like, contestant number 1, you know, if we were to go on a date to the beach, what would we do? And they'll say like, well, I would buy you ice cream. Or another person would be like, contestant number 2, same question. They're like, oh, we'd go, you know, boogie boarding. And then you would always have some weirdos like contestant number 3. What would you do? Is like, I would catch crabs from the water and feed them to you by hand. And because of that, it's also a fun style that improv theaters will use for shows. They'll play the dating game, but they'll have people come on playing characters, you know, and it's really just an opportunity for them to do character work. Mm-hmm. So the first phase of the game is there's one person who is kind of the GM. They're the prize. And then everyone else comes up with a suitor. And you play rounds of the dating game where you ask them questions. You get to know more about their character that they've created. At the end of that first phase, the prize picks the person that they're going to go on a date with. The second phase of the game, the GM role flips. So the person who was that character during the dating game, they're now the GM type person. And they are the one who is crafting the date that they're taking you on. And they're describing the scenery and they're describing the actions and things like that. Everyone else is playing the person who's on a date with them. And so Fishbowl style, they write down like dialogue choices and submit them to the player. So you have like 5 people all saying like, well, here's what I would do at this moment in the date, or here's what I would say during this moment of the date. And then it's on the person who is in the GM role to say like, okay, I'm choosing this one. This is the one that I like. The story goes in that direction, and that player gets a point. And the person who has the most points at the end of the game, you know, gets to collaborate the ending that they want to have for this date with the other party. So again, like very much like Beak, Feather, and Bone, it could be something that like maybe you play this game as you're doing character creation, you know, and then you export some of these people into a long form campaign later. It could be that like in the middle of your D&D campaign, you like go to Fantasy Las Vegas and your party gets wrapped up in this like dating contest. But more than anything, it's just a short, tight rule set that kind of creates an opportunity for emergent storytelling, for collaboration. You know, is that like game as algorithm for emergent storytelling, where it's like, all right, I'm going to like give you the order of operations, but it's on you to like make your friends laugh or, you know, hit on your friends.
Right. No, I think I love that. And we were talking, I posted in a Discord we're both part of the other day, the Brain Trust, about, you know, the span between board games and RPGs, but what you just described is absolutely a callback to parlor games, right? Like, let's all sit around, like, let's have this conversation.
It's also a callback to closet
you know?
theater.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, like people used to just sit around and read plays to each other.
Yeah.
Because it's fun to talk with your friends.
Right.
It's fun to tell a story.
Right. And so I love some of the different pieces and feels that you've brought into that to make this really kind of cohesive thing that also is just a cultural touchstone that we don't see in the exact same. Like, I mean, I remember growing up in like in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, dating shows, there were, you know, a different dating show on TV every single week, it felt like. And they're also just like not really a thing anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's always interesting to see people pull things out that have this really great conversational reality, not only about what's the game we're playing, what is the moment that we're having, but also what part of our common shared culture does this touch on that some games are able to do. And I love that idea. It sounds great. Will and Hydro and Starkiller Fish are all very excited about it. So great. I'm super excited. I know we've been popping up some images from the Kickstarter. It's if you search Possible Worlds RPG Kickstarter, it's going to come up right now. That's going to be the easiest way to find it. I will also make sure if you're watching this later on YouTube that there is a link to it down below. But I would encourage people to go check it out, to hit that follow button. Right now you're sitting around 277 followers. I would love to see you get, you know, up over 500 before you launch. What is the launch date for this? I know it's coming up, but you've still got a little bit of time.
It is March 23rd. Yeah. March 23rd to April 22nd. And yeah, it's the big difference between this and Beak, Feather, and Bone is that I'm not afraid to beg.
Right.
I am telling everyone about this, that like, if you support me, I would love to see your support on this. The 2 big tiers, like I said, are going to be the $25 digital subscription and the $50 physical subscription. But there's also going to be a single game tier where just for $5 you can get one of the games if you just want to taste and possibly like as a late backer sign up through BackerKit later. And there's also just going to be your typical like, hey, I'd like updates, here's $1.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about it, and I'm really bowled over by the support of the community. You know, I had a number of tweets drafted that were like, if we can hit 100 followers, I'll say this about the games. Or like, if we hit 50 followers, I'll do this, that, or the other thing. And then like the end of the first weekend, we were at 200 and I didn't have any chances to do any of that.
Right.
So now I'm trying to like, man, I had these good promotional ideas, but Like, is it too gutsy to ask for 300?
So if we get to
So we'll see.
500, if we get to 500, I want you to think about what you're going to do, because that's going to be my goal for the game. I would love to see people, and you can go either to the Kickstarter, or if you go to possibleworldgames.com, which is right underneath Tyler's face right now. You can actually just there's a couple links there that will get you to the page.
There are like
also
4 different pages on that website that all mention the Kickstarter.
It's
I want to make sure
if
anyone is looking to learn about me, they will have no choice but to learn about these games.
Yeah. No, I've been thrilled just to see again how you launched out in this. I've appreciated everybody in the chat who's been there. And if they want to find you on social media, I know it's right below you, but go ahead and say it one more time also for people out there.
Possible W Games. Because did you know Twitter has a character limit? So launching a company, a lot of it is months and months of work that then pan out over 2 days, because you want to change everything at once. You don't want to tip your hand. And I was getting very paranoid about, as I told more people the name of the company, that someone was going to like squat on the username. So I went to register Possible Worlds Games on Twitter, and it was like less than 24 hours before the launch of the company that they're like, hey, this is too long. What do you want your handle to be instead? So just think of W as like the middle initial.
Yeah.
Possible W Games. Twirl the mustache.
Possible William Games, Possible Walter Games, Possible Wendy Games.
Shoot, I didn't even think of that. My middle name is William.
There you go. That's what it stands for. Thanks so much for coming on today. If you guys are out there, if you're a designer, you want to come on and talk sometime in the future on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we do community content here on Plus One EXP. I'm happy to interview somebody either one of those days. And if it doesn't work out, today is a Friday because I had to move off of a Thursday, and Tyler graciously allowed me to. We'll be happy to talk about your games. If there's designers out there you want to hear from, please let me know at Plus One EXP across any social media platform. On Wednesdays, every other week, we'll be doing a Backer Quest, which is a takeoff of our Zine Quest series, which will be just looking at different projects that have come out that are live on Kickstarter, talking about what we love about them, how we're supporting them, if we're backing them. So please come back on Wednesdays for that. Twitch and YouTube both are great ways to follow us, but you can find us on any social media platform for any of that. And then we have a number of actual plays from small indie RPG creators, as well as some larger indie studios on an irregular basis that happen when they happen, and just keep an eye on all of our social media outlets for any of that. But again, my name is Tony Vicinda. You can find everything we do at plus1exp.com on social media, or at plus1exp.com. As I should have said the .com before. I don't know. My brain's tired right now, apparently.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. At plus1exp or plus1exp.com to see all the things that we do. I'm super excited. It's not up yet, but next week we will have copies of Hieronymus in our store, and our game Beards and Beyond is shipping out now if you go and order it. If you also need any beard products, go there. We'll have lotion and lip balm soon for the unbearded. And all that money goes back to helping support the tabletop games community and helping pay our editor for all of our videos. So if you like this content, it's a great way to support it. But please, more than anything, go check out possibleworldgames.com and sign up for that Kickstarter, because I don't know what's going to happen when Tyler gets over 500, but it's going to be something good. I'm going to make him commit to that.
Yeah, Possible Worlds is really, my attempt to go legit, and we'll see how it goes. A pivot's happening at the end of March, whether it's a good one or a bad one.
There you go.
Well, end of April, really. But yeah, and thank you, Tony, for having me on.
Oh, of course.
I've really appreciated all of the championing you've done for the community, for creators, and also, let's not forget that your games have some of the best design out there as well. Like, all of the products that you were spitting out for Repugnant are really gloriously ugly beautiful.
Yeah, John DeCampos, who was my collaborator on that one, is a phenomenal artist, but Johnny, who does all of our layout and who did the design on B&B, did a phenomenal job in his style also too. One of our hopes is always that whatever we're producing, that art and design influence each other as we go through the process. And that's been a really cool thing. And then part of my background is Artifaction, which is, I think, now being rebranded as Keepsake Games and Keepsake Content. And so it's not as intensive as making a scarf. We're going to talk about that game on next Wednesday, but it's making things that are part of your game and part of your game world, and then inviting other people to interact with them. It's one of my favorite things to do. And that's one other reason why I loved Beak, Feather, and Bone when it first launched, was that map building concept. So No, we're gonna. Vi from Collapse Without Permission did finally give us a good sign off for this stream. This is the only stream I have a sign off for. This has been Prestige Class with Tyler Crumrine. Class dismissed.
I like it.